Yeah, so I think maybe we could just get started. So first of all, thanks everyone for connecting. And maybe let me just stop sharing this for a second. Both to the people who have signed up for the class. So if you've just signed up, this is the Frugal Science class, which is essentially a global experiment. I'll just briefly describe what we are trying to do before we begin. And at that same time, we'll transition into today's class is much going to be about just getting to know each other a little bit, trying to understand and share how we are thinking about we will run this class, and essentially just sharing the sets of tools we'll be using. So my name is Manu. I'm a faculty at Stanford, and then I am joined by several of the mentors who will be helping engaged in this class from time to time. Individuals that have engaged in this class come from every discipline, every age group. I'm just absolutely both, blown away and just thrilled and excited with the breadth of people that have collected together to join in this experiment. And the experiment primarily started, the origin of this class is just as scientists, all of us watching and seeing what's unfolded in the COVID context. I think both the scale of the sets of challenges that we have all been grappling with before COVID came along, but the glimmer of hope for me and why I decided to run this class, particularly at this time, is we saw the power of global communities coming together. And I think as a scientist in my own life, although I work on a lot of community projects, I have not seen the level of engagement that has happened across the world. And so this was both a challenge and an opportunity to gather together. All of you who are joining in for this course, you should consider this as an experimental class. We are exploring how we will engage together on challenging projects, but with a very simple principle philosophy of frugality and thinking really about cost and performance and the merging of basic and applied science. And I'll talk a lot about this in today's class. But before we begin, maybe one of the threads that we should do is, maybe Tyler, you should just do a brief introduction, and then I'll share a few premises and the logistics of the class, and then we will dive into introductions for the mentors. So Tyler, could you just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Manu. And yeah, thank you everyone who's joining. I think this is going to be, just an absolutely crazy and totally organic thing that's never really been tried before. So the fact that you're participating in this is going to really, you're really going to be the ones driving this. So thank you. I'm Tyler Chen. I'm a second year PhD student in bioengineering at Stanford. And I guess I'm going to be the head TA for this course. So I'm handling a lot of the course logistics and working on figuring out how we'll build structures to help you guys as a community really come together on a lot of these frugal science ideas in whatever area and solving whatever problem you think is really, really important. So I think a lot of this, like Manu was saying, really this is about, there are some lectures, Manu will be teaching some really fantastic case studies. But I think really the core of this is about getting the community together and figuring out ways that you can all work together on these problems that you care about a lot. So I'm going to be helping support that with any structures and things that are necessary. And would love any feedback that you guys have.
Okay, and I see Tyler Ashley is now on the line. Yeah. So maybe let me just share a very brief vision of what we are trying to do. And transition that into a brief intro to some of the mentors who've been able to join from around the world as well. We are all going to do this in the context of a few sets of tools. So just as a very brief, if some of you have not seen this as yet, there is a Notion page. We're using Notion primarily to document much of what we will do in the class. And so I'll get back to this in a detailed form, but if you don't have this access to the Notion page, just look in your emails. You should have all received it, because this is the key to unlocking this course per se. But let me jump in and share a little bit of why we started this class. I have spoken to many of you, and many of you have been friends for several years now, where we've been exploring the idea of how does science and society meet in a framework where many of scientific advances make it into hands of people around the world. I think as many of us being basic scientists, applied scientists, people working in communities, this has been at the heart of much of the work that we have done in my lab, but many of you are doing around the world. And this framework has been talked about, the framework of frugal science. And it's become to a point where a lot more people study this in the context of management and how this is an effective strategy. I think I just want to state that much of what is published about frugal science broadly is in that space, and we will not be spending too much time on that. So this class is about practicing frugal science and not assessing the ideas of frugal science. So this is just, I just want to state this, what it's not going to be. Although there is fantastic literature on frugal science and its role in how it's been applied and how in management practices, it's incredibly valuable. What we'll try to do is take a different view, a view of an inventor. I think I feel proud, and just, the mentors that I've had in my life, that I feel comfortable calling myself an inventor. And many of you are inventors. Sometimes you don't even use that term yourself. But one of the key aspects of this is going to be is if you are in the process of directly engaging in solving problems, how do you use a framework of frugal science in your work? This is going to be an extremely interdisciplinary class. So I apologize in advance, but we do not have a choice. We were thinking about it that we would start one track first and experiment, but we started realizing that for this class and experiment to succeed, you have to choose problems that you are passionate about. And I know many of you are incredibly passionate about the sets of challenges, so we do not want to limit either your creativity or your vision. And this is why we assembled a group of panelists slash mentors who will be engaged in the process. But I want to mention that it's perfectly okay if you feel lost along the way. I think I feel lost literally even right now and most of the time when I do my own work. And as many mentors, when I'll ask them to speak about their own work, will share, being lost is one way of finding your way. And so it is perfectly okay for you to feel overwhelmed sometimes. We will be covering sets of areas that might be completely outside your comfort zone. The other aspect of this class is it was important to us to come together as a community. So you should think of this much more as community engagement or community activism in some sense, as compared to a traditional class. Many of us bring scientific insights to the table, but many of us bring empathy for the problems that we will care about. So it's extremely important that you both value the sets of citizens that have joined in this class per se. You value their intellectual contributions, you value their wisdom, but also you learn from each other. I think, frankly, all of the folks who are joining in will learn far more from each other than any of us, for example. So I think that's something that I just want to lay out early on before I start. So I'm going to give you a very brief review of what we think about frugal science is and why this framework is important. And then we will transition very quickly to introductions from some of the mentors who are actually online right now. So to me, one framework that we have been thinking about is when and how to think about cost in scientific solutions. And this has been sort of the journey for us for the last 9-10 years when we've been thinking about challenges. And we made a realization that often enough cost is brought in into the last point of when you're trying to evaluate a solution. And what we're going to try to do in this class is front and center cost will be one of the, not the primary criterias, but one of the primary criterias that we will look and evaluate. There are many ways of thinking about this, but I think I often like to think about this in the context of orders of magnitude. If you can shave off a cost of a certain solution by an order of magnitude, you potentially can make it accessible to multiple orders of magnitude of people around the world. So you should be thinking about the kinds of solutions that we'll be exploring should look and feel like ballpoint pens and pencils of the world, rather than the Ferraris that we also see around. The other aspect of this is we are going to constrain ourselves by thinking about problems first rather than the domain expertise we might have. So if you embed yourself in the sets of problems that you care about, I think this would drive much of the interest that we are looking for, even if you don't have domain expertise in that space. So here is a few sets of examples for why I feel just as a scientific community, we need to come together in providing frugal solutions. This is a picture that I took in the field, and what you see here is a health center. And this is a health center that's open once a week. It is also a bus stop where a community would come together to get healthcare. And one of the challenges that if you just really look at the broadest number of how healthcare is delivered around the world, this is the reality for a significant portion of the world. I think things are improving everywhere, but the challenge that still remains of, in the context of COVID, I could just say a single word: how would you do diagnostics under a tree? Why don't we have COVID tests that work in our own homes currently? So this is a challenge of thinking about delivery of healthcare where people live, in conditions and situations where people live. This will drive much of the discussions in this class, and we have many mentors and experts that are joining from around the world who actually work in hard resource limited settings around the world. The other way to put this is you really have to bring care to people where they live. And for many of you who are passionate about healthcare and healthcare delivery, you can take these same sets of models and apply them back to how healthcare is developed and given in tertiary hospitals as well. And I think just a very practical way for putting this is this example that I often use from our field sites in Madagascar, where literally we have to walk 12 hours to reach a patient. What does that mean for your healthcare solutions? So I want to quickly go through a few sets of other challenges and then dive into the mentor introduction. So the other space that we will be thinking quite a lot is science education itself. 10 years ago, when we started working in this space, we realized there was a disconnect between healthcare and education. And most often, for many of you who have been practitioners in this field, you know and understand that these are really two sides of the same coin. If you cannot convince people that science-based principles are relevant in their lives, then from an educational context, then really those sets of facilities would never make an impact. And many of you learned about this course via Foldscope. Foldscope is really one of the efforts that we've been thinking about in making science education accessible. And ironically, again, going back to COVID, we find a dramatic lack of access to education and inequality in access to education in this. I think it's fair to say we are living through one of the largest disruptions in education around the world that at least I've seen in my lifetime. So how do we flip that around? How do we change that? What are the small scale solutions that we can implement today, not just to improve education in a COVID context, but far beyond? The other topic area that I just want to bring to attention, which sometimes doesn't get the attention that it does deserve, and we will think quite a lot about it in this class, especially choosing a few case studies, is biodiversity loss. So some of you have watched the BBC's latest series that just came out. It's only 2 days ago on extinction. And in my mind, it is one of the most heartfelt call to action in thinking about reducing the rate of extinction. Uh, and many of these things from a planetary health perspective are connected. And I think if some people are interested, there are some background papers that you can read about the loss of biodiversity that we have seen, and especially on species that, when elephants disappear and rhinoceros disappear, a lot of people get to know about it. But when the backbone of our ecosystems, like insects, disappear, very little gets talked about. So I think we will spend a lot of time in this class, especially as specified tracks, really dedicated to thinking about measuring biodiversity, mapping biodiversity, and connecting people to this biodiversity so that there is a response and an empathy associated when we do realize that there are these dramatic changes. Uh, so I'm going to keep moving in this. The other aspect of this class, and many of the mentors we collected together are focused on what I would describe as ocean solutions. And the ocean is very quickly becoming one of the frontiers of both exploration, but also of our challenges. Uh, if there are some physicists in the room, I might offend them, but this is really the dark matter that we don't know about, which is the microplastic that's out in the ocean. So many of you I heard are very passionate about this area. And one of the contexts for this would be is not just focusing on the research that can be done by academics in this space, but how do we enable these solutions to anybody who lives on the coastlines around the world can participate in these class of solutions. So this is another space that we will discuss quite a lot, and I think many mentors are focused on this work. And then finally, I want to state this as something that we truly have to embrace. And many of you in a COVID context have been fighting this good fight, which is the fight against misinformation. And I'm specifically referring to this from a context of science. And to me, of all the challenges that I shared, this one scares me the most, primarily because of the sense of we really do not have the class of tools to be thinking about these sets of problems. The spread of misinformation, of course, in science has dramatic consequences. But on the other hand, the sets of solutions that we have or what we've evaluated do not match how fast misinformation spreads. So I'm hoping some of you will definitely tackle these sets of challenges in the space of thinking about not just what's happening in the pandemic currently, but on a long run, how we would evaluate these sets of challenges. So with that, I want to transition to discussing and sharing who are the sets of mentors who have engaged in this class, first by the ones that are online, and then I'll quickly go through the list of the ones that are offline. And I want to close these just opening remarks with a very simple thing. How I perceive these problems are primarily focused around that cost makes the haves and the have-nots in this world. This is not about developed and developing countries. There are pockets of people that have resources and others that don't. So as long as whichever environment you're around, if you're thinking about equality and access, that's what matters. It doesn't really, you don't need to think about problems that are very far away from you. You really should be looking in your neighborhoods. But it's very important to understand that we do want to bring a sense of social justice in this context of this class. So I think with that as an opening, I am going to transition to essentially have the sets of mentors that are online to briefly introduce yourself to the class. You can take around 5 minutes, briefly describe your work. If you don't mention something that at least how I know of you, I'll interrupt and mention those sets of ideas as well. And I think before I begin the introductions for the mentors, I just want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you. You did not have to do this. You didn't have to be online at this odd hour like Pranab, Arnab. You did not have to engage, but the fact that you've engaged reminds me of why all of us are here together. And I think for the class members who are listening, I really want to emphasize that mentors that will join we have to be careful and respectful of their time. These are some of the most talented people that at least I know and I respect. And I want to make sure that we will describe the guidelines of how to engage with mentors in a very clear format so that people do not get completely swamped. But on the other hand, these are some of the people that have been in this space for long enough. So I think, I'm also very excited about as projects progress, we will be diving in this together. All of us are learners. So I think there are incredible groups of people. So this is for the mentors, the individuals that have signed up for this class come from all around the world and backgrounds that are just absolutely fascinating. So I'm hoping that you would also gain as much as you give back to this community. So with that, I'm going to do a round of intros. And I think one way I was thinking of was doing through the website, but since we have people online, maybe we can just begin. I'll just announce a name and then you could spend a couple of minutes just describe what, either frugal science means to you, or just really describe your background and the sets of problems that you find fascinating. So I'm going to go from the left corner of my screen. So maybe John, you could just briefly introduce yourself.
Let's see. Are you referring to me?
Yes, John. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I didn't realize that would be first.
Sorry, I should say the full name. Yes, John Beal.
Hi, I'm John Beal. About 30 years ago, I was a graduate student in Professor Pease's class, Professor Pease at Stanford, and so perhaps that's the connection here. I've spent a lot of time doing electronics and firmware for embedded systems, including medical devices. A lot of that has to do with fairly non-frugal science, I guess, but my interest is measurements and sensors that can be done fairly inexpensively as well. I had a project that I was interested in measuring the depth of water in a pipe, just sort of the groundwater level with just a speaker and a microphone, which are something that isn't too expensive. And I had recently gotten some pretty encouraging results and how surprisingly how well that can work if you can control various factors like temperature gradients and so forth.
So John would be in the category, we will share this, and I think with all the mentors on the site, we will also share their domain expertise, which is not listed on the website. And this will allow people to get an intuition for the kinds of things when they're reaching out to mentors. So on my screen, next is Leo, one of the maker nomads, as he's called. Go ahead, Leo.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you here. I met Manu when I was traveling around the world as a maker nomad, as you referenced. So I was visiting like maker spaces and community workshops, fab labs all over the world, and seeing how access to technology that enabled technical innovation and democratized it could be applied in people's lives to create opportunities for them as avocations and vocations in all sorts of ways. And now I live in Boston. I'm still involved in maker spaces. I'm in one right now, as you can see on the wall behind me. And I also am running a training program in small scale automation in the Boston area to help small businesses be a little more, try to survive the economic downturn due to COVID. And I also make design tools. So I try to make computational design and just powerful ideas in computation more accessible to people through designing things. So I could be a good person to talk to if you want to leverage a global network of workshops, which has a great community with it. Probably many of you identify as makers. And also if you want to distribute designs that are customizable and easily accessible to people online, I'd love to help you with those problems.
And then Leo, can you mention how many total fab labs or maker spaces did you visit and how long a time?
Let's see. So I was visiting before I had the fellowship I was on when I met you, but that year, 2018, 2019, I visited about 73 makerspaces, fab labs in 14 different countries, mostly in Europe and Asia. And then before then, I'd been to a number in the States, but it's probably over 100 now.
I think it's safe to say that Maker Nomad might become a type of a group. So if many of you who have been exploring the idea of spending some time in maker spaces around the world, do consider this as an opportunity. So the next on my screen is Lax. So Lax, could you just briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lax Iyer. I'm a computational biologist. I work at the National Institutes of Health in the DC area. I'm mainly interested in evolutionary problems. I've worked with a variety of issues such as evolution of proteins, evolution of genomes, discovering new biochemistries, and ideas in the computational space. Trying to understand biological information is what I'm greatly interested in. But I also have another hobby. I love looking at microbial life. And that's how I got to know Manu when I wrote to him about 5 years back, perhaps, saying that I'm interested in, exploring your Foldscope project and joining hands if possible. It's been a very interesting journey because most of us scientists are pretty private, but here to ourselves. But with the help of this, I was able to connect to a variety of communities and understand a variety of problems that I'd never even imagined over this period. So, yeah, that's all.
And I think the thing that I want to mention is Lax was the first individual to start a Foldscope club in the DC area. And I think from him and his experiments, we were able to learn quite a lot about how to bring these tools to broader communities. And I think my hope is that through this class, you will also make scientific friends in communities or scientific areas that are really far away from your current work as well. And, I think it gives me great joy that now Lax and I talk often about a very broad range of ideas, but none of that would have happened if I had not responded to that email, Lax. So the next on the call is Benedict from Germany. Benedict, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here. And so my background is kind of very, very diverse. So I started to become an electrician for industrial appliance first. And then, I took my rounds to start digging into microscopy finally. And I think I'm kind of a microscopist. I'm also a microscopy builder, doing lots of optic stuff with all kinds of different parts. And so I think when I joined Rainer Heinzmann's lab, I had a project, but I didn't have a microscope yet. So I started building one with just a smartphone. I think that's also the connection where we match somehow. So, and I think the way we do the smartphone microscopy stuff is a bit more sophisticated than the Foldscope, I'd say, even though I really like the Foldscope. But we try to imitate all different kinds of microscopy with 3D printed stuff. So, so to get the most of everything which is around you, for example, I don't know, some old lenses from your Blu-ray player or from old smartphones. And so we've combined it to end up with some modular microscopy devices. One of them is called UC2. So if you go to uc2.org, that's the webpage where you can start building microscopes simply as stacking together some Lego bricks. And everything is open source. So that's very, also very important for us so that other people can use it. And so I think in the end, we would like to become something like, like an Arduino for optics so that people can start getting creative. And I think, so everything what you just mentioned in your presentation is kind of what we try to do. So a little bit of education, because we have lots of physics courses which are open, and everything can be downloaded for free. So it's super cheap and available pretty much by everyone. And so we also do some COVID stuff. So recently we were able to see the virus with some really, really low cost microscopy device, which is, I think, like in order of magnitude cheaper than something from more sophisticated brands. And yeah, so we were trying to push the limits in terms of price and resolution, I'd say. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and then
maybe
what
just
I'll do
one
is
from you.
for every one of the mentors on the website, we will list a little bit of the names of the projects that they're also associated with. So if you all, while following these introductions, if you go to the site, there are links that are associated, and we'll populate more links just based on, so it's easy for people to find projects that mentors are associated with. So I'm going to keep going so that we can finish this and get back to some logistics. So the next on my screen is Elena. Elena, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Elena Garcia Martin. I'm a principal investigator in the National Oceanographic Center in the UK, so very far away from there. My background is in marine biogeochemistry, and my work relates on marine plankton, so mainly phytoplankton and bacteria, and their role in the production of carbon dioxide and oxygen. My work involved research cruises and also lab work. And for some of my experiments, I needed to fix equipment that was broken or needed to come up with very cheap solutions. So I think that this course is going to be very valuable for many people. I heard about frugal science a year ago, more or less, with the Foldscope. And more recently, we have applied for some money with another of the mentors, Kael, and with you, thank you so much, to combine frugal science and citizen science projects.
Thanks, Elaine. Ashley, you're next. It's nice that you have ocean as your background.
Yes, I wish I could say my research related to this, but I just like the background. Thank you for having me as a mentor. I'm just really excited about this course. I'm an infectious disease fellow at Stanford, and I do a lot of global health work. Primarily, I'm involved in Uganda and in Bangladesh. And one of the challenges that I see often is that we've made some terrific health gains over the past century with things like immunizations and basic sanitation programs, but we've really sort of plateaued off when it comes to health gains around the world. And I think part of the reason for doing that is because a lot of the technologies that are being developed are so inaccessible to the bottom billion, as we might say, the people who have a lot of disease burden but can't access these higher cost technologies. And so most of my work is around making healthcare a safer space. And I think that really comes to light in the context of things like emerging infections with COVID and even protecting healthcare workers in that setting. And then also thinking about things like antibiotic resistance and how are some of these healthcare institutions potentially promoting the spread, and what are some solutions that we can implement that might be low cost and can really help increase the health gains and reduce mortality across many of these low resource settings. So everything from sanitation to ventilation is the area that I work on.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ashley. And then Ashley was just in Bangladesh and just returned back. So she really got to also see front end, what does it mean for, what does COVID look like in many other places. So the next we have Jay Provin.
Hi, thanks, Manu. I'm an adjunct professor in electrical engineering at Stanford, and then the CEO and founder of Line Carbon, a startup company that's trying to bring carbon nanotubes into integrated circuits. So most of the time I deal with billion-dollar fab buildings and how to do things at the nanoscale, but I have a deep appreciation for the ability to do things on a much cheaper scale. I taught with Professor Pease for many years, EE17N, where we do nanoscale projects on not quite the level of shoestring budget that Manu is pushing for, but we didn't have a big many zeros in order to work with. So anything at the nanoscale people are interested in, I certainly would love to participate and help any way I can. I also think the topic that Manu brought up of reliability and trust in science among the population is a very big issue that I think it would be great to look at ways to contribute to that in a broad scale. And I guess the last thing I would say is I feel like I've been training for this the last couple of years since I have a 5-year-old daughter, and the ability to do shoestring budget science with her is a very important thing to me right now. It's also luckily very important to her. I do have to jump off this call, but I'm really glad I got a chance to introduce myself. I look forward to
interacting with people both from the mentorship team, which looks amazing, and the students who want to participate. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Pravin. Next on the line is Arnab from India.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so hi, I'm Arnab. It's 1:30 a.m. out here, and this is so refreshing to be with all of you. The first thing is, I guess it is still 15th September in the US, where many of you are, or even in Europe perhaps. And this is a fantastic day to start a class like this. In India, 15th September is Engineers Day. And I think what we're going to do is a lot of engineering.
Mm-hmm.
But also internationally, 15th September is International Dot Day. Now, if you've not heard of International Dot Day, I think you should get onto Google and check it out. It's a story about, it's a book actually called The Dot, about a girl who doesn't want to draw and says, I can't draw at all. And, she, in frustration, at the end of the class, she just takes her pen and just jabs it through the paper and lands up just making a dot. And she's all, completely frustrated with it. But her teacher frames this dot and puts it on the wall. And the next day she comes and sees that her dot is on the wall. And then she realizes that she can make a better dot than that. And that's the starting, a small dot. You start from a dot, and many dots together can do wonderful things. Everything is, you just start and take your dot somewhere. And I think part of this is going to be very similar. So let me, about myself, I am a professor, I am a scientist, I'm a tinkerer, and I'm a science communicator. So I work professionally as a researcher in semiconductor optoelectronics in Mumbai at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. But I'm known most as something called the Chai and Why guy, because I run something called Chai and Why. It's a program to take science out to as many people as possible. And I'm always trying to do low-cost experiments in science. And low cost often means very different things for people in the US versus people here. Something which is often $100 is considered low cost in the US, but for me, if it's low cost, it's got to be something which is 100 rupees over here. So it's a matter of scale. And I actually got into this wonderful collaborative world thanks to this little tiny virus that has taught one thing, is the power of collaboration. And I think this is something, and I've learned so much from so many people who are actually on the screen over here. I see Laura, I see Ashley and Tyler, and people whom we've actually met thanks to this little thing. The N95 mask or the surgical mask. And this is what I've been playing around with for the last 6 months, and making, what is the cheapest way you can test the efficiency of these masks? Can you come up with something which you can do for, of course, in this case, it's maybe $100 and not $10 or $1, but still compared to something which is tens of thousands of dollars outside. So I think cost is actually something which limits the availability of things to a lot of people, and how easily can you do this? And I'm also working with a hospital over here, trying to look at various decontamination solutions. Again, trying to see what is the easiest way to do it, not necessarily the most perfect way to do it also. And I love the slide that Manu put up on vaccines, because sort of hoax busting and looking at what in India is called scientific temper is, again, one of my things. I've been looking at various devices around which don't do anything, or trying to pick up fights on the net with people who are selling quack stuff. So I do all kinds of stuff, and I am eagerly looking forward to learn from all of you, mentors, participants, everybody. And I think it's going to be a wonderful experience that I'm very excited about. Thank you, Manu, for getting me into this.
Yeah, no, thanks, Arnab. Arnab has definitely been called, I looked up this thing, he's been called the Mythbuster for COVID in India. And then for some of you who are interested, when you search for Chai and Why, Chai refers to the Indian tea. Of course, there's a lot of collaborations that happen across the Chai. So next on my screen is Sherry.
So hello, everyone, and thank you, Manu, for this opportunity. It's quite an honor to get to be a part of such a community. I came to know Manu in 2014 when I was initiating research project targeting water sanitation and hygiene among Maasai youth in Tanzania. Since then, I've used the Foldscope and some of Manu's other Frugal inventions in my school-based research in Tanzania and India, and now we're hoping to kick off a cluster randomized controlled trial related to dengue prevention in Myanmar, and we would like to use the Foldscope to engage youth there. So I'm an associate professor of public health in Norway. I'm from Canada, and I have an adjunct appointment in Calgary as well. But my passion really lies at the intersection of education and health. How you can democratize science and engage youth as the next generation of scientists, leaders, and educators in finding sustainable, low-cost solutions. So over the years, it's just been a great pleasure and honor to get to work with Manu and his grad students who have been to the field with me in both Tanzania and India. So yeah, thanks again for the opportunity, and I look forward to learning from the other mentors and interacting with the students and soaking up all the wisdom and knowledge of this group.
Yeah, and I think Sherry has definitely taught me how to really empower youth. In most of her projects, if you see, they're centered around action items that students, and especially younger students, can take. Sherry, do you want to say a word about your microplastic expedition?
Well, you know what? I was just going to say I forgot to mention the microplastic expedition, because I would really love to connect with others working on this issue. In December, I participated in an all-women sailing expedition circumnavigating the globe to try and collect data on microplastics, and also to engage youth and others in developing strategies and solutions to address the issue. So I sailed from Aruba to Panama via the San Blas Islands, and we got to engage with a small group of youth there, which was a really exciting opportunity. And I've been looking for entry points to get involved in research and collaborate on this issue. COVID sort of derailed that effort, but I need to get back on track. Mm-hmm. So it would be great to connect with some of you on that front as well.
Yeah.
And Manu, yes, has just been really inspiring with his commitment to transdisciplinarity. And it is quite rare to see in my experience. So I'm really, really, again, very excited to join.
Yeah, I think one way that I look at this class, and I think this is really especially for the attendees, and especially if there are younger audiences, is, you should think of that we all learn from each other every step of the way. So there is no real teachers here. There are no, we're all learning. And I think one of the threads would be is we have to figure out the logistics, because it is a large group, but we also felt that it needs to be the large group for it to truly capture the transdisciplinarity that is needed for the current problems. So I think as we go along, we'll figure out the logistics, and eventually I think we will try, depending on how many people join the class synchronously, slowly we will try to move towards something where everybody can get a chance to participate. I think we were worried 700 people will join on this call and we will not be able to, Zoom will not be able to hold. There's around 300 of us, so I think we'll try figuring some technological solutions as well. So the next on the on my screen is Fabian. Fabian, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you. I was thinking while I was listening to all this, my father was a Scotsman, so frugality comes fairly naturally to me, I think. My sort of technical background, I started out by building, I think what we could argue was a better scanning electron microscope than its predecessors. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been here. And but what I really got interested in during that time was using the electron microscope as a writing tool rather than as a looking tool. And that led me into various forms of what we've originally called microfabrication. Now you have to call it nanofabrication to be popular. That led me into such things as microchannel heat sinking. I had a very good student who introduced me to that. And even as far as DNA microarray synthesis. So that was quite a widening for me. I first came across Manu when I was in Washington, D.C. for a meeting. I didn't meet him there, but I came across his paper, which I didn't attend. My excuse is that I was chairing a parallel session. But another student who I'm hoping we can engage in this, Anna-Reza Noje, told me about this paper, and it turned out that Manu worked in the next door building to me. So as soon as I got back, I contacted him, and he nailed me and said, well, I want you to do the same thing that we did with the fold scope with the scanning electron microscope. And I've been working on that pretty much ever since. But John Beale, he was in my group a few years ago, and I remember two things about him. One, that he came up with a very cheap EKG unit that I never actually got around to trying myself, and he might like to tell us something about that sometime. Also, he might like to tell the story about how we tried to cool the ballroom dancing room with a fan, and that's quite an entertaining story, and I'm not going to spoil it. I'm really looking forward to this class. As Jay Provine mentioned, he and I ran a class on, freshman class on nanofabrication. It was a very limited budget, so we had to be quite frugal there. And I think Manu has seen some of the projects these guys did. And this class was to have been renewed in this last spring, but like so many other things, COVID put a stalling sign on that. I'm really looking forward to this, meeting the students and also some of the fellow mentors, and I hope to learn a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one thing amongst all the things that Fabian described that I just want to mention, I'm sure all of you know about the Feynman Prize. Feynman had proposed 2 challenges, and Fabian and one of his students actually solved one of them. So if you go back historically, and I love that story of how Fabian and his student discussed the idea that should they frame the check they had received from Feynman, or should they cash it? So there are some really historic stories, and think about it yourself. If you receive a check from Feynman, would you frame it or would you cash it? Okay, on that note, we move to Shah Selbe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shah. I started my career like in traditional engineering, so I spent about a decade doing satellites, really expensive satellites, like $500 billion satellites. So the absolute opposite of frugal science. And during that time, I started doing a lot of work with Engineers Without Borders and getting more interested in how I could use my engineering expertise in other areas. And it was actually at grad school, I went back to grad school at Stanford, that I started working with the Center for Ocean Solutions and started trying to bring accessible technologies into wildlife conservation and ocean conservation, anti-poaching work and things like that. And so that's what I've been doing since. I started an NGO called Conservify, which was kind of the first makerspace / tech development lab that was just entirely devoted to conservation work. And we've been doing a lot of projects around all sorts of different technologies, drones. One of them, our big project is, you see behind me, is Field Kit. We're really trying to kind of reimagine what scientifically relevant environmental sensing looks like and how we can build it in kind of an open source and modular way. And that's like our main focus around that. So if you go to fieldkit.org, you can find a lot of information, but we're really trying to kind of open up that space to allow people to do interesting stuff. I'm also, so everything we do is open source. So I'm also on the board of the Open Hardware Association. So, you know, always trying to kind of push that forward as a means of kind of increasing accessibility of these tools globally. And I know Manu because we both became explorers at Nat Geo at the same time. You know, a lot of the work that I do still is still with Nat Geo. I was a fellow there for quite a long time. But now Conservify works a lot with other NGOs, other conservation groups to develop solutions and deploy solutions and create open source opportunities for other people to pick that work up and continue it on. So.
Yeah, and then I'll make sure that I link many of the websites that Shah mentioned so people get a chance. I think it's very important for class participants to get to know about what has been done in the past, and this class will run as a few case studies, but you can yourself identify many other case studies based on the work that's being described here as well. And we'll make sure that all those links are available. Next on my screen is Tyler. Tyler, do you want to just briefly reintroduce yourself and then maybe say a word or two about your science as well?
Sure. Yeah, so brief reintroduction. I'm Tyler Chen, second year bioengineering PhD student at Stanford. My background is sort of split between mechanical engineering and genomics. Although now and material science. Although currently I'm working in a neurotech lab, which is completely separate from everything else I've done. And I've also been working with Manu and Ashley, and who else is on this call? Laura and some other, and Arnab on the N95 Decon project, which got me into the public health side. So really kind of just jumping all over the place and having a lot of fun. So yeah, really interested in supporting teams with projects in pretty much any area that you're interested in. I would love to support. I think generally my philosophy around frugal science, I have a saying. I think a lot of science and sort of scientific communication has, it's sort of built up over the years, right? And there's many layers of terminology and fancy words that people end up using to describe very, very specific things. And that's important because specific things need to be described. But also, I think that sometimes discourages people from feeling like they can become scientists on their own because they say, I don't know what any of these words mean. So for me, I guess the phrase I like saying is that nothing is fancy and everything is just Legos. Everything is just very, very simple, very stupid building blocks that when you stick them together in just the right way, and if you can understand those building blocks, you can create something really beautiful. So that's kind of my philosophy. Everything is just Legos. I think we'll try to push that on the Discord, making sure that really we're including everyone in the way that we describe things and making sure that really anyone can ask a beautiful question. So that's kind of my philosophy around this, and I'm super excited to work with all of you, mentors and students, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a ton.
Yeah, and I think I just want to mention Tyler was the only TA who actually still stood on the line when I said we're going to run a 700 people class. So I think only because of him, we might actually be able to pull this off. Next on the screen is Emmanuel.
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to see you all and be with you. I'm calling in from Maine. I'm a professor of oceanography at the University of Maine. About 10 or 12 years ago, I started doing a class here called Engineering Literacy, because we have a lot of students, particularly from marine biology track, who are afraid of any electronics and basically anything that's electronic programming. And the idea was to start a class with zero background, and by the end, build something that can be useful for them, like a Tupperware that goes up and down in the swimming pool and measuring a property that is of interest to them. And it worked. It worked. Everyone who's taken the class through the years has been able to get to the final part, and in the process teach themselves everything. I don't teach in the class, I just facilitate. I'm a cheerleader. And it's amazing to see the reverse psychology. In the first class, they usually are in shock. What do you mean you don't teach? And by the end of it, they do everything on their own. They show what they get. And when they ask me question, I just go on, show them how I would find the answer on Google, and very soon they stop asking questions. And this empowerment was amazing. And from that class came several projects, one of which I initiated was a way to use your phone like a satellite, ocean color satellite, look at the ocean, and from the color, they infer information about water quality. You can do it with your own phone. If you have a gray target, a target of known reflectance, you can use your phone like a satellite and get information about water quality from it. And there's many more advances since that have been done in that realm. So that's the part that excites me. I call myself a social scientist. I work with people. The fun for me in science is the interaction more than sometimes the question themselves. And the idea of sharing everything we do is something that resonates with me as well. So I hope with all of you, I'll get to have more fun together. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Emmanuel, for joining. And amongst all of us, also, Emmanuel spends a lot of time in the ocean on research vessels. And so I think it's very valuable as people are starting to think about problems and challenges of what that working environment looks like. many of our oceanography fellows here will really be able to provide you a real experience of what it really means to work in the ocean and the challenges with it. Next on the screen is Laron. And I'm sorry, I'm calling you all randomly. I don't know if you all see the same order, but it just keeps all of us on our toes. So yes, Laron.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Liron. I'm a first year biophysics PhD student also at Stanford. And I'm also just tremendously excited and honored to have this opportunity to teach this large group of people and join all of you mentors. And I'm interested in evolution and adaptation and sort of thinking about what are the limits of what's possible within sort of the computational framework of evolution, but also most importantly, thinking about access and making sure that we share our results. So yeah, I'm very excited to help everybody and join this effort.
Next is Andrew York. Oh, Andrew, you're muted.
Thank you. Is that better?
Yes.
Very good. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity. My training is physics and math. My ambition is to be an inventor. 10 years ago, I started spending a lot of time with biologists. And I found that to be wonderful because biologists gave me much more useful questions to work on. So for 10 years, I've been working on trying to push the boundaries of what's possible with optical measurements. And so my definition of success, at least for the first 5 years, was to try to find the best optical instruments that exist and see if I can come up with ways to make them better. And I found that very satisfying, but I'm coming to think that this is the wrong definition of success. So 5 years ago, how my funding changed from the government to Google. And I realized that my definition of success didn't have to be getting papers into good journals anymore. My definition of success should shift to producing useful innovations that people actually use. But then I look at the fold scope and I think, I still have some room. I still need to improve my definition of success. I have the wrong definition. I think the right definition is I don't need to make the highest tech stuff. I don't need to push the limits of what's possible. I should do something that's useful. So I'm here to learn because you can't solve a problem if you don't deeply understand a problem. And for 10 years, I've been immersed in the problems of research biology, which is great. But I'd like to be immersed in a wider range of problems. So I'd like the folks here to teach me what I should be working on instead of what I have been working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And some of you who want to see, you should look at Andrew's most recent microscopy inventions as well. And his approach of how he's been publishing primarily using Git framework and a completely new way of thinking about publications themselves. And I think, this is really why I collected this group of people, because all of us redefine what's basic and applied. And I'll talk a little bit about it, but what Andrew described is a great example of that. So next, we are very happy to have Erica from Bolivia.
Hi everyone. I'm really happy to join you and thanks for the invitation, Manu. It's a pleasure to join this panel, really incredible bunch of people. Well, I'm from Bolivia. I am a veterinarian and I'm working mostly on conservation medicine. So basically using medicine to promote wildlife conservation. To do that, I'm also using the One Health approach, which means that, human health is closely related to animal health and to environment health. So we work on all these topics together, working pretty much on zoonotic diseases and now also with vector-borne diseases. So I heard that there's someone working on dengue, so it's going to be interesting. And yes, we contact Manu due to the ABAS application, but then we discovered that he has so many crazy nice tools that we can apply in the communities we work on. We mostly work on the Amazon region with indigenous communities most of the time, really remote areas. So we're always looking for new ways to make people develop their own solutions for the problem, the health problem they have on their own. other animals and people, and so that they can also protect the nice areas where they live. So yeah, it's a pleasure to join you.
Thank you, Erica. And I think, yeah, one of the things that we will talk quite a lot about is One Health and planetary health, because just for some of you who have seen the clouds in California, you cannot just think about human health and ask very narrow questions. And I think we're all very passionate about this issue right now. Next on the screen is Anton.
Hi, I'm Anton. I'm one of Manu's grad students. I'm a 5th year in material science, and I joined the lab having a lot of physical chemistry experience with things like colloids, interfaces, macromolecules, and just being interested in how they can be used to build things like Legos. And Manu introduced me to this idea of doing it at a different length scale and taking much more of a sort of tinkering based approach, which has been a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm really excited about just making the scientific endeavor accessible. And I've always just been amazed by the things that can be done with, on a shoestring budget. So some of the things that I've worked with in the lab involve thinking about microplastic detection. So I'd be excited to connect with Sherry on that a little bit. And yeah, just making these tools and techniques and a way of thinking about problems, yeah, more accessible to people. So it'll be fun to learn from all you guys.
Okay, so we'll keep moving through. Next is Anesta.
Hey everyone, my name is Anesta. I'm a researcher in Manu's lab. My initial background was actually in architecture. I got in touch with Manu firstly because I was able to adapt his paperfuge for my graduate thesis, and having incorporated microfluidics into it for stool samples. And since joining the lab and working mostly on a lot of COVID-related work, so I've been learning a lot from the team, and so I'm really excited to learn even from a even larger team here, but also engage in creating beautiful solutions with through simple means and simple resources. So, good to be here.
And I think from a diversity perspective, I just want to mention Anesta's background started as an architect, and now she works on healthcare. And you can immediately imagine that this is what we mean by transdisciplinary work, because, and not only the fact that there is that switch, but the fact that you can use principles learned in one field and truly actually apply that. Next on the screen is Deepak.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. I can't say how amazing it is to hear from all these people. Yeah, so I am a grad student in Manu's lab. And I think, so my background is in mechanical engineering and biophysics. And as you know, in Manu's lab, there are these kind of two wings which talk a lot to each other, biophysics and frugal science. And my exposure to frugal science was interestingly initially through osmosis, because I used to share lab benches with people working on frugal science projects. And I just started finding that a lot of the tools and techniques started making their way into the microscopes that I was building for biological questions. So it's kind of interesting. More recently, so me and Manu developed this tool for tracking plankton in the lab as though they're in the ocean. So we call it Gravity Machine. And so I really like building things to ask biological questions. But along the way, I've also realized that my real passion is actually making measurements of anything. And so I'm here to learn about what are the useful measurements that we should be making on this planet. And more recently, I've also been helping out on a COVID-19 ventilator called pufferfish in Manu's lab. And that's been a very fascinating experience in this kind of collaborative work. So I'm here to learn and share whatever I can. Yeah.
Thanks, Deepak. And I think Deepak also embodies a lot of basic science and applied sciences, just one and the same thing, two sides of the same coin. The next is Ray.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Ray, and I'm currently a second-year PhD student in Manu's lab. And my primary research interest is actually the modeling and experiments on biological questions, in particular the fluid mechanics of some interesting microorganisms. But before coming to my PhD, actually, I was a medical doctor in Taiwan, and I left my hospital job after finishing my intern year. So originally, I did not think that I would get involved in any healthcare related work in Manu's lab anymore. But since the COVID COVID outbreak, Manu has been deeply engaged in many fronts of the COVID research. And in the early period of time, he recruited me to help to work as a red team to check for the validity of many different aspects of the project. And after a period of time, I'm primarily focusing on new mask, which is converting a snorkel mask into a PPE that can be used by the healthcare worker. Yeah, so I'm very happy to share whatever I know and really happy to learn from everyone.
And I think a comment I wanted to make, some of you saw in the syllabus, we mentioned that we want designers in this world that can solve PDEs. And Ray is one of those where I say doctors that can also solve PDEs. And I think one important aspect of this class is you should really not limit yourself to what you are capable of. It would be very important for you to go. Ray is one of those examples where he could have had a very traditional career in medicine, but decided to really jump into fundamental science. And now we are realizing his background truly helps us define these questions and bring it back. So it's really a full circle. So I'm very excited about that. Next is Ethan.
Everyone, I'm Ethan. I am a graduate student in Manu's lab, and I'm a third year in bioengineering with a background in both bioengineering and computer science. I spend a lot of my time on various projects, making things, building things. That's really what I love. So everything from software to embedded systems, electronics, and even a bit of hardware, mechanical things, all different kinds of areas. So I've worked with Deepak on the Gravity Machine project and on the COVID ventilator project, as well as some other, too many other things in lab for me to really remember right now. And I've just learned so much from everyone that I've worked with, and I'm excited to kind of get to know all of you. Yeah.
And I think one of the factors that we'll think about is for all of us who will be documenting much of our work on Notion, and you'll see lots of comments from Ethan also on the open source licensing sides of the story as well. As we start creating projects and people want to learn the landscape of open source licensing, I think Ethan is a great resource for that. Next is Jose from Brazil.
Hello, it's really nice to be here, and I really expect to be able to share a little bit of my knowledge and learn a lot from all of you. So it's my pleasure. Thank you for your time and the chance to speak with you. So I'm speaking from Brazil. I'm a professor, I'm faculty at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, which is in the south of Brazil. I teach parasitology and biochemistry. I think I'm connected to this experience here because I was a postdoc at Stanford a couple of years ago, and then I met Manu and followed his amazing work. So it's really an amazing opportunity to reconnect and know a bunch of new people. So it's really nice. So my research background is in host microbe interactions. I'm particularly interested in mosquitoes and vector biology. So I study the interaction between Aedes aegypti, the mosquito, with arbovirus, particularly dengue. This is a big problem in Brazil, in the tropical part of the world. So I'm taking a molecular biology approach to understand a little bit of persistent infections in mosquitoes, because dengue does not make a mosquito sick, but make us sick. And my question is, what is the mechanisms behind this really interesting and simple phenotype? So, and I'm available to chat a lot about everything I could help with. So thanks for the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And you will all see mosquitoes will fare a lot in our discussions because they are a big problem. So I think, thank you, Jose. Sure. Next is Laura.
Hi, good to hear from everyone.
I'm a postdoc at Stanford, and my work focuses on environmental health and engineering for public health. So a lot of the interventions that I do sort of human-centered design and design thinking for are household level interventions. So for example, how can we improve passive ventilation to reduce respiratory diseases in slums? How can we reduce children getting parasites by improving their floors? So I work on both sanitation and air pollution and just sort of general other child health and maternal health issues. And both on the sort of design of interventions as well as their evaluation. And that's, you know, really important. You have to have both parts to say, you know, yes, we made something cool, and now how does that get used in the world? Both at the sort of citizen level, just for sort of daily understanding of science, and then at the higher level for, you know, applications in healthcare. But and then on the household level, sort of, are you achieving the goals that you want? Did your floor actually cause a reduction in parasites in children, right? Because we need to know if these are useful investments for lower income people to be making, right? There's a lot of demands on their time and money. And so how can our frugal science best benefit them, given that they have to choose what to invest in? So yeah, I'm really excited to work with everyone and look at these problems from many, many different perspectives.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Do you want to also just say a word about your randomized controlled trial in Bangladesh? Just
Sure.
very briefly, because I want to cover, since we only have 10 minutes left and we still have a few. Yes.
So as many of you know, randomized controlled trials are sort of the gold standard in defining what is a good intervention. And the CDC and WHO were sort of slow to recommend masks. So we are doing a randomized controlled trial of masks in community settings in Bangladesh. We have 600 villages that will enroll. Half of them will be intervention and receive masks at their households, at markets, and at mosques. And there will also be active mask promotion and then surveillance to see who is actually wearing their masks. We're doing cloth masks and surgical masks to test them against each other. And thanks to a lot of people in this group for helping design the cloth masks. We have what we think are some of the most effective cloth masks out there. And to Arnab for doing some testing of washing surgical masks to show that surgical masks can be washed and reused. And so that's why we see them as a scalable solution.
Mm-hmm. And I think for many people who think about interventions and ideas, how do you really even design a randomized controlled trial? There's a lot of expertise in the group. Next on the call is Kale, who's signing in from
everyone.
UK.
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be with this really impressive and exciting group of all of you. So I'm Kale. I'm a principal investigator here in England. Been Zooming for 14 and a half hours today, I realized. So it's been a long one. So yeah, I'm always terrible at these things because I feel like I'm really bad at not being interested in things. So I can't really tell you what I'm interested in because there's too much to be interested in. But I feel like, you know, most of my research, you can put me in the ocean bin. Most of my research has to do with problems in the ocean, how the ocean interacts with climate, how life in the ocean interacts with the ocean and with climate. So that's kind of where I'm situated. The one thing I'm probably have the superlative here at in this group is I'm probably the worst at building things. So ask other people if you need help with getting things built. But I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I think Kale builds beautiful mathematical frameworks. So if you look at his paper, I consider building mathematical frameworks as building. Kale, do you want to say a word about your citizen science project in UK? Just very briefly.
Sure, yeah, so Elena mentioned it briefly, but Ellen and I just wrote a proposal with the help of Manu to try to get a bunch of ultra low cost imaging devices that have been developed in the Prakash lab into the hands of environmentalists in the UK to try to set up time series observations, but also to support them in answering conservation and science questions of their own. So we're fingers crossed for that. We'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last but not the least is Julie Griffin.
Hi everybody, so my name is Julie and I'm actually here to introduce Liz Hadley, who Manu invited to this class. I'm a project manager for Liz and her Hadley lab. She is a professor at Stanford and she's a paleoecologist. She's also the faculty director of Jasper Ridge. And for anyone who doesn't know, Jasper Ridge is 1,200 acres of biological and research reserve right between the Stanford campus and the Santa Cruz Mountains. So it's a really interesting place to field test tools for conservation. because you have wild lands and you have very developed spaces and you have mountain lions moving right through there and a lot of changes, which she would be happy to tell you more about. So Liz and her lab have been working hard at conservation technology, particularly to look at the distribution, the abundance, and the status of wild animals, and particularly trying to develop non-invasive sensors for that wildlife. She and Manu are also developing a class that was meant to be in Rwanda pretty much right now. Yeah. Co-learning with Africans and Rwandans there on biodiversity and tools to measure that. And so that also in itself was going to be very interdisciplinary with social and biological issues there. So Jasper Ridge is a perfect place to field test tools for conservation and biodiversity, but Liz is in contact with partners around the world on all continents, and I'm sure would be very excited to work with many of you. She probably knows many of you already. And she wanted me to say that anyone who's interested in getting to know the lab is welcome to our lab meetings on Wednesdays. You can reach out to us. We've been opening them up pretty widely and having some great conversations.
Yeah, and I think one thing I wanted to mention also is Liz just finished writing a book on the idea of Anthropocene and what the tipping points are. I think it's very valuable to just also understand if we don't do something, what are the consequences? And I think this class is built around the idea that we are not here for grades. We're not here. We are truly here to learn how to solve problems. And I think in Liz's writing, I sometimes find that voice in which we have no choice but to tackle these problems. So this is, I mean, I think we've reached a point in many of these problems we're discussing that unfortunately looking away is not an option. So I see another...
If anyone wants to see what Liz looks like, you can look at the film that Manu mentioned at the beginning, the BBC Edinburgh documentary, because she's featured in that.
And I see one new panelist. Is that Dan?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
I've
yes.
been here the whole time, but I wasn't listed as a panelist.
No, I couldn't see your name, so yes, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah,
I was
well,
trying to guess from a few pixels.
I'm delighted to join the team here. I'll just give you a little background about myself. I work with optics, light optics, electron and ion optics, and I'm interested in materials modifications, microscopy, and nanofabrications. Generally, though, I'm interested in sort of rapid prototyping and finding creative solutions to hard problems. My background, academic background, is electrical engineering at Stanford University. I worked with Fabian Pease, working on a multi-beam electron microscope, and that's my connection to the class. After I graduated Stanford, I was a professor in Singapore for about 9 years, and I've returned recently. During my time as both at Stanford and in Singapore, I think I've mentored about 75 undergraduate research or design projects. So I really love working with these sort of design projects because I learn a lot through the process. I like frugal science. I think one of the things I like to do is retask instrumentation to unintended. That was originally intended to different purposes. So that involves a big part of reverse engineering and understanding what they do. So I like to tinker and take things apart and then retask them. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
So I see we still, we are right around 1:50. So I do want to end on time, but I think I just want to give a few logistics parts of the class per se. First of all, thank you for all the mentors. This is really from the bottom of my heart. I've known many of you, have friendships that we have followed through, but I think engaging in this manner is something that I was worried about asking to begin with. And I'm still worried because this is an experimental class. And at that same time, I am just absolutely thrilled. I mean, I think it was very important that we all get a chance to share a little bit of the stories for the individuals that are joining to learn the principles of frugal science through design and by doing. So I think on the logistics side, what we will be doing is everybody should make sure that you have access to, I'm just very briefly going to mention this, that you have access to the Notion page for the site. Much of the content would appear here. Everybody should have access to Discord, which is right here. It's not so organized right now. Many of the participants have introduced themselves here, so people can take time. But then most importantly, we will be opening up these tracks, which will act as just idea discussions for the sets of areas people are interested in. But very quickly, the way we would operate this class would be in a team context. We will cover a few examples of case studies where some of these mentors would help teach for the first few groups. But at the same time, this class is a do class. So for all the participants that are listening, the 300 or so people, start thinking about what space do you really want to practice the art of frugal science. It's perfectly okay if you're interested in everything that was described and all the tracks that we've been discussing all the way from biodiversity to planetary health. But you have to pick a problem to truly understand how difficult these problems are. And the other notion that we will practice is this is going to be a collaborative process. We have defined a very simple IP policy, which is as ideas are generated in teams, we would be very inclusive, but the teams will get the chance to decide which tracks they take, whether open source is the right track or they propose other sets of tracks, but at that same time, read through certain sets of policies. And then the last bit before I close is I think it's extremely important for us just as individuals fighting this good fight. We respect each other. We respect the intellectual freedom that people bring to the table. If we intellectually disagree, we disagree based on logic and certain sets of principles that are defined. And I think more so, just as I am just absolutely thankful for all of you. From my perspective, of course, mentors will play a key role in guiding you through your projects, but you are all bringing a lot to the class as well. So I think this is one of the aspects that I want to highlight, that when you introduce yourself, share your backgrounds, share your past work, because I know many people who have signed up for this class could have really been mentors for this class as well. And I think it would be very valuable. And then the last bit would be is try to, as we will discuss the logistics in the next class on how to build teams, try to reach out to people, have conversations, and help us run this class. This is going to be a self-experiment and self-organization. Everybody is in charge and nobody is in charge. But what that means is as long as we follow a few sets of rules, it will allow us to run a class like this smoothly. And at the end of the day, what we have to ask ourselves is, what did we learn and what did we bring to this world that did not exist without your participation? That is the only criteria for your evaluation. Let's bring something to this world that does not exist. And I think I want to end with kind of an African proverb that many of my friends tell me, and it's better to show it, but in the context of an elephant. But really, this class is about doing things together. So we are trying to go far. This is going to be something where these projects would have legs of their own around the world. We will be participating and building with global communities. So let's make sure that we are trying to do this not in the context of going alone, but going together. So I think with that note, I'm just going to say thank you to everybody. This was a blast. I just have chills already thinking about what we could achieve. I don't know whether we can, I think, but what we could achieve with the level of talent. And I think we haven't even begun scratching the surface of the sets of participants that are joining. Feel free to ask questions. I will stay online for a little bit, just answering certain questions that are in the Q&A session. Tyler can stay on the logistics as well. But we will reach out to everybody, both on the mentors and the participant side on the logistics of how we will divide up teams. And I think it is a volunteer class. So for people who are engaged, you can engage at different levels. We would like you to really complete a project. But on the other hand, if you just want to listen to the lectures, that's also okay. We are not monitoring this. You're allowed to participate in different ways. But the only way to truly learn is to engage in a project. I think and we will decide upon how large the teams will be as the time comes. So with that, I just want to say thank you, everybody. It is just such a delight to see all of you, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And folks who want to stay on to hear logistics, we will stay here and answer some of these questions that are in the Q&A.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a few sets of questions. So Tyler, I can just go through and answer some of these.
Yeah, and I think some of these would be good to answer live, especially for folks that are watching the recording.
Yeah, if there are live questions, we can just take that.
I think maybe
would it be possible for us to add a community Notion page to our own Notion page? I think the answer is yes. Are you going to provide frameworks through which we can formulate teams and match with mentors? That is yes. I think we'll use some kind of Google Sheets or something to be able to list sets of projects, and other people can sign up on different projects, and mentors can sign up based on that. Then there's a question, is everyone
just
going
for
to—
the team forming, we expect team forming, people are going to be talking naturally on Discord. Mentors, by the way, Discord is a platform. We'll send you the information for this. But yeah, people will be interacting naturally on Discord. I've already seen many ideas pop up. I think you guys are really already a great community that's at organizing yourselves around various issues. So I think we're going to let that continue. That's really the whole point. And as that continues, I think teams will naturally evolve over the course of the next, 2 to 5 weeks. And in that process, then only at the very end will we send out some form for official teaming. But really, it's all about interacting with one another to form those connections and ideas.
And I think in the next class, I will formulate how to make teams, or what are the good lessons to learn building teams. So just a little bit, so you have some framework for this. There is a question about recording and access to recordings. These will go live on the Notion page. Then there is a question about possibility of doing some lectures that are friendlier to other time zones. We have been exploring that, and I think for some lectures and special lectures where participants and mentors from India are engaged, or other parts of the world are engaged, we'll try to switch that around. So I think, yeah, this is something we are considering, but currently the time of the class is the current time of the class. How many countries are represented? Tyler, do we know that answer yet?
Unfortunately, we don't yet know the answer. I'll be sending out a poll in the next day or so that everyone can, upvote their country.
I think I do know, for example, some, people from far and wide are engaged, and I think, yeah, we'll know that answer.
Yeah. I would say there is definitely a minimum of, guessing here, minimum of 18.
Okay.
Probably less than, probably less than 60.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
There is a question of, is it possible for someone to send a document with the name and specialization? So I think, yeah, we will put together many of the introductions that have been put on Discord. We will put them on a Google Sheet so they are accessible to everyone, and especially with categories. Will people receive a certificate? I think the certificate is what you do. The certificate is what you accomplish in this class. So I think there is no formal process. I'm just considering all of you that are participating from abroad and around the world as collaborators. So this is no different than us running research, except we are doing this in a framework of a class. And I think the other hope is that we get to create a global community that continues to engage on this. I think the class is going to be a short-term experiment, but what comes out of this is going to be much longer term. Is there a possibility for a project around astrophysics? Absolutely. I think in the education space, there is already a few ideas that have been tossed around. So both of them are very relevant. Arnab mentioned there's a question around Frugal in India versus Frugal in US and other countries. I think Frugal will depend on the type of problem that you're trying to solve. So if you're trying to solve a problem for 1 billion people, it should be accessible to 1 billion people. If you're trying to solve a problem that a few hundred people need access to, that the prices would change. But I think, yeah, it's very important. We will be mostly taking problems that have a very deep context of where you're trying to implement them. So then there were other questions about, a couple people mentioned it's quite overwhelming. I think I had agreed on that. It will be overwhelming, so just you have to brace yourself a little bit. Logistics for students, grading. So I think one thing we'll do is I'll create a channel for the students at Stanford that are taking this class and are enrolled on assignments and grading policy, and we'll kind of write that document separately and send it out. How do you see a project on biodiversity? I think this is something that we'll discuss on the idea sheets briefly. The class will last around 10 weeks, not 10 months. So roughly around 10 weeks, which is a regular quarter here. Is there a possibility for a project in cancer biology? Absolutely. I think if you think about where the largest number of cases of cancer are, and I think we've just had a couple of weeks ago discussions on how tobacco consumption around the world and how it correlates to many different kinds of cancer. Non-communicable diseases are a huge challenge. And I think so definitely you should not think of this purely from an infectious disease perspective. Are we thinking about frugal solutions that can be used at wide scale or on specific problems, but scale for the users? I think it really depends on the questions that people are interested in. Both of them are relevant. Solving an important problem, whether it has a user base that is small or large, is absolutely okay. I heard a little bit about needing aid with translating classes. Yes, so I think if you are a translator and you would be interested in translating some of the key lectures, we would love for you to list that, and let's create a translation channel, Tyler. And especially for some of you who primarily speak a different language and don't speak English, we have mentors that speak Spanish and different languages. So I think correlating with them would actually be also very valuable, because we want to make sure that English should not be the criteria based on what you can experience in this class. Somebody mentioned I feel lost on the huge pool of ideas in Discord. So Tyler, do you want to comment on that?
I can jump into that. That's totally understandable. The fact, I was absolutely amazed when 300 of you jumped on Discord all at once and started blasting ideas everywhere. It's very overwhelming for you. It is also overwhelming for us. But I think if we can say, take a breath, say, okay, this is going to be fine. We're not going to miss anything. I'll make sure everything is very clearly communicated so you don't miss anything important. And then just start, dipping your toes into each of these channels. If you need help with using Discord, we have the help channel, which you can message, and people will be, I think everyone is very, very willing to help one another. And I've already seen that, and you guys are doing amazing. So keep that up, and feel free to just start scrolling through ideas and seeing what interests you, or write something up of your own.
And I think I want to make a comment about the use of Discord. Discord is really our way for informal communication. As you get to know more people here in the class, get to know each other, we will also have a much more organized content in a Google Sheet, in which projects that rise to a level where we believe suddenly there is enough momentum around sets of projects. And then the Notion pages for those projects are the ones that are going to be driving the team. So think of Discord as a chatter, while Notion is where structured communication will happen between teams. And I think we will make it in a manner where sets of projects would be open for participants to join. So if you're deeply excited about a project, you reach out to the people in that project, and we're going to try to accommodate to make sure that people get to work on what they want to work on. I read something about astrobiology. I think frugal science and astrobiology definitely. If you imagine one context of this is we can send literally mass specs and the kinds of measurement instruments on tiny objects to both Mars and other planets. What types of technologies that are used in those spaces could be used both on planet Earth and other places? So I think satellites are a great example of where much of this is feasible. So I think, Emmanuel, this is really for you to think about whether some of the technologies that we send to space might also have applications on the ground. I think I'm reading through here. There is a sense of projects on energy. Absolutely. I think there are a few mentors that were not able to connect today that are primarily focused on energy. I think there is Tim and a couple other people that I'm aware of who will engage on the energy side. Will we focus on how to maintain and organize projects? I think this will be the main topic of the next class with the case study, where we will talk about Notion and how to maintain your projects on Notion. And I'm looking at what to brush for. I think as you do case studies, you will realize there is no one topic that you can brush broadly, but I think Emmanuel put it the best. As you choose a project, we will train you and teach you how to self-learn. And soon enough, you'll start realizing we are not so relevant after all, and you have all the resources. But I think choose a focus area first, and then the background will become much more relevant. So I think in some sense, the most important bit would be is to highlight what sets of problems you're actually excited about. I think all assignments will be on Notion. Everybody would have access to it, but they will primarily be driven by you on your projects. So there is, I think the work that we want you to do for this class is really focused on how to move your projects forward. I'm looking at what else has to be answered. Guidance towards doing tinkering around project. I think one of the things we will do is we will share some of our techniques that all of us use for tinkering, how we go about creating a space, both mental space and physical space, that is amenable to tinkering. And also, especially in a COVID context for students, we will definitely talk quite a lot about how you can just go to your garage or your fridge or your grocery store and look at the kind of materials that are available to build upon. So I think there will be a lot of feedback on making sure that if you have never properly tinkered, we will try to make sure that there are instructions around some test projects, for example. And one thing that I'm very excited about, Zach Kun joined today. One of the case studies will be around cardboard. And we will talk a lot about what can be done both in the physics of cardboards, why they work, but what you can actually build out of a simple object like cardboard. I think this will be the warm-up exercise for tinkering. Do we get matched with mentors? I think mentors, you get matched to projects, and mentors pick projects. So that's really the framework. What is going to be the future of our projects? I think the future of the projects will depend on the individuals that work on those projects. Prior experience in research, I think it's good to have, but not necessary. But I think having empathy to the problems that we're interested in is extremely important. Is there a maximum number of projects you can enroll? I think the answer is 1. We want you to just commit to 1 project at this time, because otherwise you will be spread too thin. And the goal is to focus on 1 thing so you have enough of a bandwidth to actually accomplish it.
And this class itself is this 10 weeks, but really I think our goal is, we're hoping to, this is, you guys are like the spark for this, and we're hoping that you can continue doing things much, it's a long road, right? So I think if you can, try out a bunch of things, but then at the end really focus on 1 project for the 10 weeks. And then if, you decide, hey, I want to take this 1 project and continue running with it, that's perfect. If you say I want to jump to other projects, that's cool too after that 10 weeks. But for the 10 weeks, really focusing is going to give you the most out of it.
I think it's important to focus on 1 project. Yeah. Will the lectures be translated? I think we will try to. I don't know. We currently don't have a bandwidth to do that, but I think we will try to see if we can engage some translators. And then the last one is, will the lectures be public? I think every video that we take here would be publicly posted on the site. And then the last question, I'm going to just take that as the last question and then say bye, which is, it's a trick question. It says, do home remedies count as frugal science projects? I think as long as something is scientifically based and you can demonstrate that there is science behind it, is absolutely frugal science. I think some of you who know the discovery of the frontline drug for malaria, which is artemisinin, comes from Chinese medicine. And only because of the work of hundreds of years of scholars who did not have the kinds of tools were we able to discover this wonder drug. So I think, but on the other hand, it's extremely important as we talk about misinformation, there is a lot of misinformation about what home remedies and other things mean. And it's extremely important for us to be applying a scientific framework. And frankly, the one thing that we want you all to learn in a class is how to weed out bad ideas. We all create ideas, and policy of coming up with an idea is to come with a lot of them and then weed out the bad ones, and what is remaining is a good idea. This is a principle that many of us apply in our work, but to be able to do that, you need the kind of finesse and the basic science capacity. So I think it's very important. Don't rule something out just because it sounds different, but on the other hand, if it doesn't match the test of time from a scientific basis, then it has to be weeded out. So I think on that, I'm just going to close the session. Any last comments from the mentors or anything, any logistics things that people might have that they are wondering about?
I can just real quick, just for logistics, for the mentors, we'll be sending out the same email that all the students got, plus a little more information for you guys on the Discord, Notion, all of these terms we've bandied about. Very sorry for not sending you that earlier. It was a late night last night sending out everything to the students. But then beyond that, for the students as well, we'll steadily be building out more structure in the Discord. And any suggestions you have there will be really fantastic. So we can start building this in a way that really fits what you guys are looking for.
Yeah. And then again, I have to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for everybody connecting. All right. Bye, everyone. Stay safe. See you soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.